Let's look at the budget, though, Stephen, before I get back to Michael on that. There's a lot at stake here because it's not just the remainder of this year. We're talking about the government trying to set up its message, its narrative for
No, that's
what it hopes
absolutely
is a
right.
second term as well.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. This is an important budget, which is why it will be a surplus budget. Jim will have delivered two in a row. That's two more than Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull or Scott Morrison. First time, I think I heard earlier today on Sky that first time since almost the 70s, 80s that someone's delivered two in a row. So these are the positive things. The government's fiscal position is consistent. We've got surpluses. And that's what we need to see, because you're right. If the government gets it wrong in a week's time, it will utterly disrupt its ability to sell its economic narrative going forward into the next election and to have a general positive message out there to people that they are getting on top of the challenges.
Because, Michael, we've discussed this many times before, but when you go to an election, the fundamental foundation has to be, one, the economy, two, security. This is so important for Labor to try and reinforce that message, as Stephen said, and a part of that is the image, the symbolism of a second surplus.
Well, absolutely. You have to convince electors that voters that their best days are ahead of them and that you're in charge of the economy. I don't think Jim Chalmers is in charge of the economy. I think it's in charge. It's in charge of him. I'm not a great rep for him, as you know. And by the way, let's be frank about this. Josh Frydenberg delivered a surplus in 1819 of $7.2 billion, and the only reason it's not counted as that is because the $7.9 billion in net revenue from the Future Fund wasn't included in the budget, and now it is. So if you use the same calculation now as they used then, he got a budget surplus of over $7 billion in 1819. So if Chalmers was intellectually honest, he'd tell us the truth, which is why this sort of schoolboy remarks he goes on with don't endear him to serious people in the financial markets. But yes, the bottom line is he has to keep a much tighter rein on expenditure. He ain't no Peter Walsh. He ain't no Paul Keating. I mean, they dramatically reduced government spending when they were in government, I think from almost 27 to 22 or 23% of GDP over a period of 3 or 4 years. I mean, Chalmers is letting expenditure run out of control, and that's one of the reasons the market thinks with a lax fiscal policy, it's inflationary. I mean, look, the economic theory tells you this, KG. Anything which adds to aggregate demand is inherently inflationary.
It's just, dishonest of you, Michael.
In spending so much money,
that's a merchant
in spending so much money, argument. In spending so much money, it gives them. It's not dishonest, Stephen. It happens to be the facts.
It is dishonest.
And the problem is Chalmers cannot keep control of expenditure. That's one of his problems. He's got to resist all the demands on him, which is very difficult for a treasurer.
I want to hear Stephen's. You're interjecting, Stephen. Go for it. What do you want to say?
I mean, to suggest that the economy and the budget is guided by only one half of the equation, which is aggregate demand, is just dishonest. They can't win because we're delivering surpluses. So they go, let's forget taxation. Let's just talk about this number. Let's forget the fact you have to add the two numbers together to see what the outcome is. That's why it's dishonest. I mean, that's why Jane Hume was very careful in what she said. Michael's a little less careful in how he described it, because Jim Chalmers has called out Angus Taylor correctly. They are misleading by selectively quoting one statistic, which is part of an overall statistic, which is two different numbers who get put together. So that's why it is absolutely dishonest. And Jim was correct to call Angus Taylor out on this. And Michael's just working off the same talking.
The Deputy Prime Minister has reacted very strongly, as has the Prime Minister, to this incident in the Yellow Sea involving an Australian helicopter, another near miss involving the Chinese military, Stephen Conroy.
Yeah, look, and they should be both raising it publicly like they have been, as well as in the what they call the back channels and the private conversations of talking to the ambassador. Absolutely right. So we're engaged in enforcing UN sanctions in this mission. But again, China will talk all the nice, pious words about how they're all about stability. but their actions in the South China Sea, you've seen their water cannon attacks on Filipino ships. You've now seen, again, another example, not just the lasers into pilots' eyes, not just dropping chaff in front. Now, what they've done today with the flag, this is not acceptable behaviour. They need to be called out. But it also shows why the government must continue to work to ensure that the Chinese stop bribing their way and coercing their way into the Pacific Island nations, and why Australia needs to be vigilant on this. We keep working with the Indonesian president, who said he's got concerns about China's behaviour. We've got the Filipino president, who's now openly being, water cannon attacked, whatever phrase you want to use. You've got Japan and South Korea. And then we are simply enforcing UN sanctions. And all of a sudden, China are on the side of North Korea against the UN sanctions. This is not acceptable behaviour.